We're thrilled to have, and you made a nice distance travel to get here. Mario Cesario, a business entrepreneur. And Mario, it's a thrill to have you on the show. Welcome to our show today.
Thank you very much, Howie. I'm very excited to be here, and excited to be here with you all as well.
And that's really what our show is all about, meeting interesting people who make a difference. And for our viewers out there, Mario, you're a business entrepreneur involved in fitness, martial arts. Let's get a little bit of your background. Talk about how you got into fitness and martial arts and your impact on the business world.
Sure. So I got into martial arts when I was 12 years old, actually. Pretty simple story. There was a studio that was opening up right by my house, and it's just something I wanted to try. So I signed up, and that next 12 years of my life revolved around my martial arts training. 6 days a week, I'm there, I'm practicing, I'm learning, and I fell in love with it. I have 5 companies right now, 5 businesses that I run. My first business is my martial arts studio, and it's like one of my biggest loves. I'm really passionate about what the martial arts did for me, what it does for people, and I just think it's such an awesome experience to practice martial arts.
Absolutely, and I know one of your main focuses about joining us tonight is that you feel the martial arts in particular can have a huge impact on young children, preventing bullying and its impact on people who have been bullied. Getting involved in martial arts can definitely make a positive impact on their life. Why don't we get involved in that discussion, because I think that's a real important discussion.
Sure. So I think that most people have the perception of martial arts being like, all right, if I signed up my kid for martial arts or karate class or taekwondo or whatever, it's going to make them more aggressive, and that the fundamental thing that they're learning is going to be how to fight, how to kick, how to punch, and all of that. And although I will say that a important part of martial arts is self-defense, the real benefits that come from training martial arts are all character-based. It's all, it's from the inside out. So yes, you'll get stronger, you'll get faster, you'll learn how to throw a punch and a kick and defend yourself, but it's the internal work that happens when you train in martial arts that really is where the power is, in my opinion. So developing confidence, self-esteem, discipline, focus, all of these core fundamentals that every parent wants their kid to have as they get older. That's what we focus on in our studio, and that's the experience I had growing up taking martial arts, and it's why I think it's such an important thing for every kid to do.
So many kids throughout the country suffer from bullying, and a lot of these kids, it's very, very prevalent that a lot of these kids suffer from low self-esteem, lack of confidence. They have very few friends. They're very unhappy in their lives, and I feel getting involved in a program like you offer can change all those things over the course of time, where a young student who is suffering from not feeling good about themselves, low self-esteem, low confidence, not having discipline, not feeling a part of anything,
Right.
It can make a profound difference in a young person's life.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I've noticed, with our students and just through the years is that particularly younger students from, grammar school, middle school, and even high school, what I've seen is that age group, they develop their identity based on their external experiences, right? So everybody grows up in a different way, but let's just say, the basics at home. There's issues at home that external experience is going to start to develop that person's identity. In school, right? Like everyone says, kids are mean, middle schools rough, you know, and it's true, right? And those type of external experiences start to shape the identity that these, you know, of all kids as they're growing up. So in relation to martial arts, I think it's such a powerful experience if it's the right place, because it's one of those external environments that really starts to shape their character and their identity in a positive way. So like you said, a really key word there was belonging, right? And when you're in an environment that supports your growth and it's also dependent on you pushing yourself, that's a really, really powerful thing. So the more a kid, and I'm saying kid, but you know, I'm talking, you know, let's say under 18, the more a kid starts to find themselves in environments that support them positively, the easier it is to develop that part of their identity, so that when there's negative influences, it doesn't have the same weight, right? And you see like the typical stereotypical kid that's being picked on or being bullied, those things that are happening to them really carry a lot of weight, and it's sad. It's really horrible, you know? I mean, years and years and years ago, we didn't hear of kids committing suicide because they're being picked on. And nowadays, it's such a more common story. So as a martial arts instructor, a person who really, you know, cares about like the future, what do we do about that, right? And it just reminds me of how important it is, the work that we do. Because if one kid is being picked on, but they identify themselves from a more positive frame of mind, it doesn't have the same weight. And that's a really like important thing. You know, I have 2 kids myself. You have kids. We talked about that. So when we look at how we want our kids to be raised, a really big part of that goal is for them to develop that strong sense of self, that no matter what anybody says to you verbally, it doesn't carry the weight, because you don't allow it to penetrate your identity and who you want to be and who you want to continue to grow up to be. And that's not necessarily addressing the physical side of bullying, which, you know, of course we can talk about as well. But as far as, you know, that initial point of how do the benefits of martial arts really help kids in that time of their life, hands down, by far, it's that environment in so many studios, great studios that are out there that work from the inside out and not necessarily the outside in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, let's go back to the Karate Kid. I mean, that is, you know, the movie that has stood the test of time, but it's so typical of society. About here's a kid that moves to a new area. He gets picked on by a bunch of bullies. He doesn't have any friends. He feels isolated. He gets involved in karate. All of a sudden, his confidence and his self-esteem go up. And more importantly, he's able to protect himself and get respect against the bullies. And I think that's what I think is so important about a young person getting involved, is that if the bullies know you're weak, they're going to pounce on you. But once the bullies know that you can defend yourselves and you can kick their butts, all of a sudden you're probably not going to be bullied as much.
Yeah. So in the talks that we do in different schools around, you know, around the state and whatnot, we talk about why do people bully, right? What makes a bully a bully? Why do they do it? And there's a whole bunch of reasons why, but generally all those reasons fall under the fundamental that a bully is a bully because their self-esteem is not intact. And they do different things in order to feel good. And that's the bottom line. So whether it's because they're jealous, or they have their own issues at home, or when they pick on somebody, it makes other people laugh, which makes them feel good. You know, whatever the reason, that is why a bully does what they do. And you know, going back to the Karate Kid, I don't think there was a time in the martial arts industry that more people were excited to, sign up for martial art classes than when they saw Daniel LaRusso come from Newark, New Jersey, and before he met Mr. Miyagi and all that, which is, it's awesome, right? And it's a good story, but the story I think resonated with so many people is because there's truth to it, right? The concept of ignore them, just walk away, just tell somebody, all of those things, they work to an extent, right? They're good approaches, but sometimes that doesn't solve the problem, right? And that was that underdog story that we saw in the Karate Kid, where he physically learned how to stand up for himself. That first time that he got punched, he got knocked down and rocked his world. And when he started going through his training with Mr. Miyagi, all of a sudden he was not scared of the conflict and the fight. Now, in my studio, what we do is we recommend to parents to actually have that conversation with your child, right? I grew up in a sense probably similar to you and whoever else is watching, where if somebody hits you, you hit them back, right? But that's not how every parent feels, right? And the bottom line is you have to have really good communication with your child as a parent. Let them know what is okay and what isn't okay in your house, in their house, because so many times, believe it or not, kids are afraid to fight back. Number one, because they don't know what to do, but even more so than that, they're afraid to actually get in trouble, right? There's surveys and studies out there on that fighting back concept, and what they found was so many kids are actually scared to get in trouble at school, and they were scared to get in trouble with their parents, so they didn't fight back. And it sounds like crazy, right, when you think about it, but we instill in our kids so many rules and how things should be, and this situation with bullying isn't much different. It's something that you really want to teach your kids about and talk with them about and prepare them for, right? I don't see the world getting easier, and I'm sure you agree. The world's crazy, right? There's trouble at every turn. So doesn't it make sense then as parents that we sit with our kids and start to prepare them for the difficulties that they might face? But for those parents that do not want their kid to get beat up, and they want them to fight back, they want them to be able to protect themselves, martial arts training is invaluable. To me, it's a life skill. I think everyone should have an idea of how to protect themselves, at the very least, right? And conflict resolution, unfortunately, when all of those non-violent or non-physical approaches don't work, sometimes you do have to physically protect yourself. And if it comes to that, I can't think of any better training than martial arts training to prepare them for that.
Let's reflect on the kids out there that are getting bullied. It's my philosophy, because we've done a lot on bullying in the show, is that if any child is somewhat different, they are heavily prone to get bullied. For instance, if a kid is overweight, if the kid is either gay or transsexual, if the kid dresses a certain way, the new kid in school, it always seems like the new kid, just because they're the new kid, they get picked on. Talk about those type of kids and the challenges they face. The kids that are a little bit different, that can get prone to bullying because they're a little overweight, because they're gay, because they're the new kid, because they dress differently. Any of those things, have you found in your experiences are the kids that will get bullied more than so-called other kids in school?
Yeah, for sure, and just going back to that, why do bullies bully? Who they're looking to bully is usually anyone that they can, that's not going to fight back, that's going to make it easy for them to bully, right? So with kids that are different in any sense of the word, that's the first part of their starting their, it's who they are. They're more self-aware of their identity than, at any other point of their childhood. So the first thing I would say is, as hard as it is to do at that time of their life, understanding that being different, it's actually an amazing thing. It's actually a great thing to be different, right? And we talk a lot about that, for example, in my studio, because again, when you're different, you don't feel like it's a problem until you're being bullied, right? And then all of a sudden, how you see yourself is a negative thing. And this is where like the depression and like, the downside emotionally to those experiences come from. But as difficult as it is, I think as parents, teaching your kids and reinforcing constantly that being different is an amazing thing, it's a good thing, is number one. But it's so much easier said than done, especially for the kid at that time. So this is where I really think it's important that any kid who feels like they're being picked on and bullied and just does not know what to do, they really have to speak up, right? They have to speak up. I'm gonna say it like 3 times because it's honestly that important, right? You can try to ignore, you can try to walk away, you can try to be the bigger person, but what happens is most of the times, bullies are gonna just continue to pick on who they feel like it's easy to pick on. So then those emotions of that bullied individual get stacked one on top of the other, one on top of the other, every instance, every experience. And this is again where those negative emotions and depression and eventually suicide stem from. It's this feeling of helplessness. There's nothing I can do. So at that point, I think it's so important to just continually speak up about it. They have to talk to their parents, they have to talk to their teachers, they have to talk to the principal. But I'll also say this, and this is not an area that's talked about much. My challenge out there when we talk about bullying is not always to the bully to stop doing it. It's not always to the kid that's being bullied to stand up. My challenge always goes to everybody else that's silent, that sees it and doesn't do anything, right? If I have low self-esteem and I'm being picked on, but you, either being my friend or not even knowing me, choose to help me rather than to ignore it, I guarantee you the amount of bullying that we see would change. So my challenge is always to the spectators. The bullies, they have their issues. They have to be resolved. The kid that's being picked on, they have their issues and that needs to be resolved. But it's everybody else. And sometimes when you can be a voice for someone else who's going through an experience like that, it could change their life. And it definitely makes it much more difficult for the bully to keep doing it. When anytime it happens, they're not getting laughter and they're not getting support, and they're not getting like reinforced, but they're getting stopped in their tracks. So I think that that's a really important like group that needs to be addressed as well. Everybody who just sees what's going on.
There's another aspect I want to bring up about this, is that I've had the experience, sometimes not great experience, of talking to kids that have been bullied, and I've read a lot about it. I think there's a common thread, I'm not going to say in every instance, that a lot of kids that do get bullied feel like they're alone and they don't have many friends. They're withdrawn, they kind of like tend to stay by themselves, they're kind of loners. And I feel if a child joins a martial arts studio, all of a sudden they have a home, they have a team, they have like an extended family where people care about them. And it's a way to build friendships, but more importantly, feel a part of something, where they're not alone and they're not dealing with these terrible problems all by themselves. And just the sense of being in a brotherhood, being part of a team, being part of a group, having people that care about you is so vitally important for the child being bullied. Let's talk about that aspect, about how important it is for the child to be a part of something where they feel they're getting a lot of support and they're part of a team.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for sure, that those negative emotions associated with being bullied, like loneliness, helplessness, depression, as humans, we're social creatures, right? We thrive on love. We thrive on positive environments. Like, we thrive on relationships. That's who we are just as human beings. So when that is not part of somebody's life, it does have a negative effect. It takes a negative toll. I'm obviously really biased toward martial arts because I have a martial arts studio, but I think that, for anybody on, a kid under 18, whatever, any environment where they're getting that positive reinforcement, sports are a really important part of that, especially in, the younger years and the teenage years, because you're not just getting the sense of camaraderie, but you're also developing the other parts of your character that are empowering. So when you're able to overcome a challenge, even if it's in a sport, it teaches you that you can overcome challenges. When you're required to make sure your homework gets done and your chores get done and your responsibilities get done while still maintaining an activity, it teaches you that you can do those things. So when kids nowadays are not part of anything except for like just internet, right? They come home and it's like Fortnite or video games, it's like hours on end. They never get to develop that part of their personality, of their character, that gives them that more powerful identity as they get older, which is why some of these things have so much more weight. And on top of that, just talking about like the internet and social media, it's so much easier for a negative environment to develop through bullying when you don't actually have to bully somebody to their face and you could do it behind a keyboard. And we see that so much more nowadays with cyberbullying and the internet and social media. It's like, you don't even have to wait to go back to school tomorrow to tell somebody how, you picked on somebody on the way home. You can literally text or message all of your friends. You can video it while you're doing it and still send it out. So it's like a whole different world, that we're dealing with, which is why my mentality is everyone has to be responsible for themselves. And I'm not saying it in a way where it's like, if you're being picked on, it's your fault. But what I'm saying is, if everyone can understand that no one is going to help them feel as good as they can feel except themselves, it's hard to wait for all these other things, these other environments to help them. And it's a mentality thing. And again, when you're going through it, it seems like impossible. It seems tough, which is why it's so important to be there to support people. But something has to click eventually where you can say, all right, what can I do about this? So definitely being in an environment that focuses on developing that positivity and that camaraderie and recognizing positive things, it could be life-changing for sure.
The next word I'm going to talk about is passion. See, to me, I've said this for many years, and I just feel it's vitally important. To me, I believe it is the most important thing for a student to have an extracurricular activity. Whether it's sports, whether it's drama, music, they have to have a passion, because after school, if they're going to a practice in sports, or they're going to a drama, play practice, or they're in a choir and they're singing, they're doing something they're passionate about. and they love, and they're getting support among their teachers, among their fellow students, but they're passionate and they're doing something they love. The students I worry about, and I feel personally, that need the martial arts more than anything are the students that have no extracurricular activities, because those kids, I feel, they don't have that passion after school to do something they love. So they come home and they get on the computer or whatever they do, but they're not passionate about anything. And I think those students are more prone to get bullied because they're not a part of something, and they're not doing something they truly are passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking is everyone has a talent, right? Whatever it is. I'm not sure. I agree 100% that like martial arts is especially good for people that aren't already involved in other things. But the easy answer for me is that's why it's so great as a kid. Like you should try a lot. You should try everything, right? Because then you get a sense to see what you really like, and then what you really like can turn into what you're really good at, right? And it doesn't. You don't even have to develop a passion with something that you really like. But if it's a talent that's going to become a passion, obviously investing time into it, developing yourself through it, achieving goals through it, it's an awesome feeling, right? You see a lot of kids that, like, let's say their parents force them into something. I kind of think that that's awesome at a certain point when they've had a chance to like try other things. But as a parent, if you see your kid is really good at something and they like start to waver, I think it's good to push them, to say, all right, you can keep doing this. Let's reach this next goal and this next goal. Because kids, we change their mind all the time, right? And hard work is hard work and all that. So sometimes it's good to like push them through to really develop that passion. Everybody's good at something. So sometimes the best way to figure that out is just to try a bunch of things and figure out what you're good at, and then and take it from there. I agree that when there's not something that a kid is doing and they're just like wasting time or doing anything to fill up their time, that creates a lot more of an opportunity for bad things to happen, right? Because like again, after school, if you have something you have to go to, chances are, because you are, on this other schedule and you got to get to it, you don't really have time to, get involved in other things. So I agree with that.
You mentioned about the internet before, and the thought crossed my mind about, I remember situations, I think it happened at the school was Rutgers University, where the student, his roommate, unbeknownst to him, videotaped him having sex with another male student, and he felt so humiliated by this, he ended up taking his own life. And I'm sure there are stories like this where people can do the cruelest things on the internet, and for someone who's in a state of a little bit of weakness, this is all it takes to push them over the edge.
Yeah, no, I actually do recall that. I guess it was like quite a few years ago. My advice to that, whether it's this guy's particular situation, use that word, humiliated. I think that a lot of times people, when they feel humiliated because of bullying especially, moments like that feel like the end of the world. Like they just cannot fathom a year, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. And so many times situations that we go through, they seem really paramount. And in that moment, it feels that way. And my only advice to that is really understanding that, number one, who you are is not ever something you should be humiliated by. And a bully that would want to humiliate you because of being different, to me, it's just, they're just insignificant. But it's such a challenging thing in that moment, which is where a support system is really important. but also understanding that there are no situations when you're going through it, if you're being bullied, that are worth taking your life from. I really believe that, you know, and again, 1 year, 5 year, 10 years down the road, is it even something that people are going to remember, you know? And only the person asking that question can answer it, but I think it's a good question to ask when you're going through a situation that you feel is so paramount. And if you can start wrapping your head around, no, it's not going to be that bad down the line, it's a step in the right direction.
You know, I had this thought, and I always have this conversation in my mind. Now that I'm with you, Mario, I want to talk about it because I think this needs to be stressed. We touched on it a little before, but I think this can't be stressed enough in the strongest terms. I remember having a discussion with a mom whose son took his own life, and her biggest lament was she wished she knew more. She felt her son held back a lot, and she had no idea how severe the bullying was. She'd say, "How's everything?" "Oh, Mom, everything is fine, everything is good." In your experiences, how do we get that out of the child where they're not afraid to tell Mom and Dad that I'm going through hell, I'm going through... Because I'm sure that child who took his own life, there are a lot of children like that who go into a shell and who don't express what's really going on. So in your experiences, Mario, how do we get that child to let the mom or the dad know exactly what he or she is dealing with?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question, you know, from the parent point of view. And it goes, I'll go back to something I said a little earlier, which is setting that expectation with our kids that these are certain things that can happen. And when you set an expectation early on, it could make it easier so that when they're going through things, they don't feel like to hold it in because they actually, you know, expect, okay, you know, somebody might try and pick on me one day. And if you teach your kids, if this happens, this is exactly what you need to do, again, it's a really good start. If you're a parent that has a child, like many kids, that how was your day? It was fine, like, you know, details are not a part of the normal conversation. I actually, again, going back to the support system, I do think that it's important for parents to recognize that just because they're the parents, in some situations, they're actually at a disadvantage. And that's a real reality that as parents, we need to start wrapping our heads around, because it goes through different phases, right? When you're really young, your parents are like your heroes for the most part. And somewhere around preteen to teen, that changes, and other influences become even more influential than our parents. So knowing that for a lot of parents, you are not going to be the biggest source of influence in your kid's life at a phase or two, what do we do ahead of time? Who is that source of influence? Is it another adult? Is it, you know, a coach? Is it martial art? You know, a sensei? I gotta, like, being a sensei, I can tell you there are many times where we have parents that come into our studio and just like, can you tell my kid this? And it's like the same thing they say to the kid at home, but just because we're saying it, it has a different weight to it. So that support system is, you know, also really important. But also not accepting it sometimes, you know? It's very easy to just say, how was your day? It was fine. Okay, you know? Dig deeper a little bit sometimes and create that environment and that culture where true, honest, open, non-judgmental dialogue is a part of the house. And it's work for us as parents to do that as well, but I think it's a really important thing to do, because the more that we normalize negative effects of bullying in a sense of it needs to stop, and the only way that it stops is by exposing it, it's easier, you know? But again, that's one of the situations that in that time as it's going on, it's not the easiest thing. But there are other signs, I think, as parents that we should and could, you know, start to be aware of, other, you know, smaller red flags that, you know, may add up that should encourage you to, you know, try and dig a little deeper. And, you know, it's no one's responsibility, it's nobody's fault, right? It's a team effort. And that's why I think it's so important, what I said before, you know, the other people that are around, keeping our eye on the person next to us and looking at any situation that's harmful as something that you actually do want to get involved with and should get involved with to help put a stop to it would be a really helpful thing. But, you know, just the story that you told, I don't know the woman, I don't know this particular child, but it weighs heavy on my heart too, without even knowing, because it makes the work that we do, I feel, that much more important. So when people think of karate as it's kicking and punching, it's so much more than that, and the work is so much more important and necessary than just the physical side, that, you know, it just makes me want to keep doing what we're doing forever, because we need to.
Absolutely. If we have people out in the audience, some of our staff members want to ask a question to Mario, raise your hand and we'll give you the mic, because we know that several of our staff members have dealt with bullying in the past. So if you guys have a question you want to give to Mario. Yeah. So Brandon, I'll give you the mic.
All right.
And take it away, Brandon.
Just on a personal note, I'm curious, what got you started in karate and martial arts in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said earlier, I was 12 years old when I started martial arts. A studio had just opened up really close to my house. When I was 12, my parents were actually divorcing, you know, that year. So that was one situation that I vividly remember as, you know, a 12-year-old, like my whole world was changing. Everything I knew, remember talking about like identity before, everything I knew was changing. And I wanted to try and do something to not have to like rush home after school, right? And be in an environment that again was different. Wasn't necessarily like a really like, you know, crazy environment, but it was just different. And it was hurtful for me. So that's what I did. And I will tell you, from the first class that I took, I was hooked. I went every single day, probably like 6 days a week. And then from there I started teaching, and I really enjoyed doing that as well. And that ultimately led up to starting my career as a business owner with opening up my own studio. So when I tell you it like changed my life, it really, really, really did.
So that sort of sense of home that you really felt from martial arts growing up, is that something you want to give to kids that may or may not be in that circumstance?
Yeah, for sure. I think the word like stability is what really jumps out into my head, or out from my head. That was an environment for me that was very stable. It was very positive. It was very reassuring. So those are definitely the positive aspects of training martial arts that are really important in my studio now. And truthfully, in so many of the studios that I visited, I know many martial arts school owners that feel the same way I do, in that the work that we do, the environments that we provide, the mentoring that we provide, it changes lives. It's really important work. And you know, that's why when people are like, oh, you teach people to kick and punch, you know, sure, like, okay, we teach self-defense, but the work is so much deeper than that, you know?
All right, thank you. Howie, back to you.
All right, thank you, Brandon. I gotta tell you my favorite scene from the new YouTube Red series, and I'd like to get Mario's reaction. Cobra Kai has been it's a spin-off of the Karate Kid 30 years later. And I love it. I mean, you got the two guys that are rivals, Ralph Macchio and Johnny Lawrence. And now I love the way they've done. I love how what they've done with Johnny Lawrence's character, because in the Karate Kid, he was the bully, the bad kid. And now 30 years later, they've kind of made him into a sympathetic figure that, Ralph Macchio is this, he's very
Roles switched.
role reversal. Ralph Macchio now owns like 5 car dealerships, and he's got a family and kids, and he's doing very well. And the bad guy from the original, William Zabka, Johnny Lawrence, is like down on his luck, out of work. His wife broke up, so they've kind of made him a sympathetic figure. So there's a kid that lives in his development. So this kid goes to the store. His mom sends him to buy, because she's not feeling too well, some Pepto-Bismol. So he goes to the store, and the 3 bullies from school run into him, and they take the Pepto-Bismol from the bag, and they pour it over his head, and then they go to give him a beating, and then they push him against Johnny Lawrence's car, and Johnny Lawrence goes and beats them up. So then obviously the kid begs Johnny Lawrence to teach him how to do karate, and a couple of months later, he becomes really good at it. And he's in a situation in the cafeteria where he catches the bullies bullying this girl. And he says to the guy, one of the bullies, "Cut it out." And the bully says, "You want another beat down?" And this time in the cafeteria, the kid who got the Pepto-Bismol poured over his head and got beat up kicks the crap out of the 3 bullies. And I said to Mario, that is my favorite scene of Cobra Kai. And not that I'm a violent person, but it's made you feel good that this kid who was bullied and humiliated was getting his revenge on the bullies.
That was a good scene. Not gonna lie, I really appreciated that one also.
Oh, I loved it.
Everybody loves an underdog story, right?
Oh, yeah.
Whenever you see the underdog, rising up and doing things they couldn't do before, it's awesome. And of course, it's YouTube, right? It's a series, so they're gonna really dramatize how this happens. But everybody loves an underdog story. Just going back to what you said, I thought it was really interesting when in the same series you see Johnny Lawrence going back to his childhood home with his I guess it was his mom and his stepdad, or one of several stepdads. You definitely saw very clearly what a dysfunctional environment that Johnny grew up in. So rewind now back to the 80s, Johnny's like the hardcore bully, no mercy, sweep the leg. How does someone so young, get this? And you see all these years later, that type of attitude that could have very easily been a product of the environment that he grew up in, right? So of course, with the the Karate Kid, you have Cobra Kai, leveraging their students in the not so positive way. And I will tell you, I don't think I've come across a dojo that is like Cobra Kai. I think many of them are the opposite and want the opposite. But why do bullies bully? We talked about it before, and it's interesting to see that parallel even in the show, where you could see how Johnny grew up and how easy it made sense for him to have become a bully. Just not having that support structure at home. So it was interesting.
Absolutely, and Mario, we've really enjoyed having you on the show. It's been very riveting. How can people contact you so they can get your wisdom, your advice, and your help getting especially children on the right path to better self-esteem, better attitude?
Yeah, definitely. So all my contact information is the same. It's my name, Mario, letter G, and then my last name, Cesario, Cesario. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, email, Mario G. Cesario on any one of those mediums, and they'll be able to contact me for anything.
All right.
All right.
Well, we thank Mario. Let's have a round of applause. What a great segment, great guest, and we certainly hope Mario comes back. Great job.
Thank you.